Firstly, thank you everybody for joining. As we've said, this is the webinar that's looking at the easing the load of location and constraint searches with self-service. So before we begin, what we'll do is we always record the webinars that we're producing. So if you're frantically trying to write notes down because of something you've seen or you want to try and do, please don't worry about it. We'll send you the recording and you can watch it at your own leisure later down the line. If you do have any questions, feel free to submit them. There's a Q&A session at the end, and what we'll try and do is try and answer as many of those questions as we can. And then finally, on the exiting the webinar, there is a short survey to complete, and that's really good because it helps us plan future webinars. So it aids with the webinars that we're producing in the future. So if you can just have a 5-minute input into that, that'd be really useful as well. And the final thing to note is that you are all in listen-only mode. So so you can't talk, but if you do have a question, like we've said, use the question panel on the right-hand side. And we'll do a little bit of Q&A at the end to answer the questions that you've got. So today I am Ian Usher. I will be presenting the presentation for this webinar. I'm a business development manager at CAD Corp, and I work with local and central government throughout the UK. And my co-presenter is Simon Parker, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yep, thank you, Ian, and good morning, everyone. Yep, so my name is Simon Parker. I'm the pre-sales team leader at CAD Corp, and for today's topic, I'll be delivering a software demonstration focusing on the CAD Corp Find It for WebMap.
Brilliant, thank you, Simon. And then just before, so we've obviously turned the webcam on. We are going to turn it off just for the presentation and the demonstration, just because it increases bandwidth and it'll help the presentation and demonstration run smoothly. But we will turn it on for the questions at the end. So I'm just going to disable mine. Okay. So the agenda for today's webinar. So we're going to start with a little slide about CAD Corp. As I can see, there's some of you are listening are new to CAD Corp. We're then going to take a step back and go back to basics. Briefly, what we'll do is we'll look at making sure that we're clear as to what a constraint search is, what the challenges are, and how they can help your authority. I'll then pass across to Simon to show you in practice how this is all done, and he's going to be demonstrating a product called Find It. And then, as we've said, we're going to follow up with questions at the end, and we'll get a few key takeaways as well. So CAD Corp, for those who aren't aware, CAD Corp are a UK-based software company that developed the Spatial Information System, or CAD Corp SIS, which provides desktop GIS used for capturing and analysing spatial data, but it also includes web and mobile applications which allow for the sharing, visualization and analysis of spatial information over the web. And that's all built using the CAD Corp core technology. We provide our applications across multiple different sectors, and you can see this in the slide in front of you. So sectors such as housing, emergency services and insurance. And the focus of today's webinar is government. So we work across central and local government, but that also goes down to town and parish councils as well. So taking a step back, I just want to explain what we mean by a constraint search. So today we're specifically discussing the requirement to spatially analyze and report on a large number of GIS data sets at the same time. So in simple terms, we might be interested in a location or a piece of land, and we want to know all the information that falls within 50 meters of that particular site of interest. So that could mean that we're looking at conservation areas. It could also mean that we're looking at tree preservation orders or overhead power lines. It could be any spatial reference to GIS data set that we're looking at in relation to a particular site of interest. And we're looking at officers from different departments across the organisation who often need to use the data to find out what constraints might affect a chosen site or location. Or it might be things to be aware of, like access constraints or planned works on a particular site. And the constraint search shouldn't be restricted to council employees either. So councillors and residents have got an interest in this information, and therefore it needs to be available in an accessible way. So what we like to do is we like to keep these sessions as interactive as possible. So we've just got 2 quick polls that we like to run. And what I'll do is I'll just launch the first one. So the first question is, does your organization currently provide self-service constraint searches like what we've just talked about? So there's a lot of authorities that provide these, but is your authority providing these as a self-service tool? I forgot to launch it, there you go. So you will be able to answer, there's a yes, no, or an unsure option. And I'll just wait for those to come in. Just give you an extra couple of seconds. So what I'll do is I'll give it a couple more seconds and I'll close it off. So I'm going to close that off because it's stabilized. And what I can see from that is that most of you are saying no. So you can make use of a tool like this, which is really good. You've come to the right place to find out more. And then we've got a second question as well. So is your organization considering providing self-service constraint searches? So again, are you actively working in a planning or land charges department, and have you got first-hand experience of these tools being used? How do they work for you? If you can answer yes or no or unsure to those questions, that'd be really good as well. And again, I'll just give you a couple more seconds. Brilliant, and I will close it off. So thank you very much to all those that voted. And I can see from that question that everybody, well, sorry, the majority of people, over half of you, are saying yes. So perhaps the tool that you've got doesn't quite meet your requirements, maybe. So again, you're in a really good place to find out more about the constraints tool that we are offering. So the challenges that come with this type of constraint search come in the form of increased demand for constraints types analysis. You might have limited GIS resources to perform these searches. They can be quite intense and need a lot of GIS resource to find where the data is and plug it into the GIS that you're using. And the GIS desktop software has the same capabilities, but requires users to be trained in it. And there's also a demand for accessible tools with standardized reporting. So just because your GIS is used for analysis, it's not necessarily the best method of presentation of that information. We're going to talk about how web mapping, like we have in front of us, is the ideal tool for constraint and location-based searches through various use cases. So shortly, Simon will be demonstrating our product Find It, and you'll see here how we're utilizing ordnance survey data. And in this example, we've got the master map topography as our base mapping. And historically, constraint searches have been carried out by a planning or land charges department in order to let the applicant know of any limits associated with a property or piece of land and possible restrictions in its use. So we'll start with the planning use case. So there's 4 use cases, and Simon will go into a bit more detail, but the way we're going to do it is we're going to start with the planning officer. So the planning officer will check to see whether the property has permitted development allowance remaining. Allowing residents to do this helps pre-planning and discourages invalid applications. So it's worth noting that some of our existing CAD Corp customers have been discussing adding payment gateways and charging for this type of service as well. So once that planning permission has been applied for, our officer might then need to know the local plan constraints that might influence that decision and drill down on the data to investigate in more detail. So it's usually contacting third-party services such as the Environment Agency for their opinion on the constraints process. And then beyond planning, there are other applications that can utilize the same technology within the council remit. So land available for development is one example. So to be able to import relevant information into a land availability assessment report, or a housing economic land availability assessment is an exercise to determine the quantity and suitability of land potentially available for housing development. But it could also be utilized in the environmental impact assessment as well. And we'd be really keen, before I pass over to Simon, we'd be really keen to hear other ways that you can think of to utilize the same tool. So if you can think of anything while Simon's demonstrating, if you can drop it in the question side, we can probably read these out after Simon's done his demonstration. Okay, so with that, what I'll do is I will now pass you over to Simon to demonstrate the Find It product.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we are particularly interested in a particular property. So at the top of WebMap, we're going to perform a search for that property. So I'm going to search for that property using a number, and we're also going to use the postcode as well. And then from that drop-down list, we can see that a result from the address search. So we can click on that property or that address, and then the map then navigates us to that location on the map, and we can see a pin there identifying that property on the map. So now that we can see the property, we now want to perform a planning application search using the Find It service. And there are 4 different types of methods for performing the search, and I'll show you the different options that are available as I run through those use cases. So for my initial search, I'm going to use the master map option. And this enables me to click a feature on the master map layer, such as the property outline, and then I can use this as the basis for my search. And if I want to, I can also select multiple features to create a larger area of search. So maybe I also want to include sort of the front and rear gardens of this property. And I also want to include the outbuildings at the rear of the property as well. So when I hit search, the search will then query my planning application data, and it has returned 3 historic applications that intersect my area of search. Now for each result, I can see the planning reference for the application. I've also got details of when the application was received. We can see details about the proposal, so I can see that it's a single-story side and rear extension. We've got information about its status, and then we can also incorporate hyperlinks as well. So this might be a hyperlink that goes to the public-facing website, for instance, and I can see the planning application details in more detail from the website. And for each result, so I can move on to my second result here, we can also hit the show button. And what that does is on the map, it shows us the extent of that application site boundary. And I can see that with the sort of the red outline on the map. But viewing the results with the map might be good enough here in this example. But if we want to keep a record of the search and the results that we found, we can select the download PDF option at the top of this dialog. Now, the administrator behind the service can customize the format of the report, and it is divided into sort of 3 sections. So on the first page, we can provide an introduction to the report. So here we're saying this is a planning application history report. Underneath this, we've got some details about the search that we've just performed. So we can see our search date and time. We've also got sort of a unique identifier for this specific search. We can see how many applications were found. And then underneath that, we've also got a map showing the area used to perform the search. Now for the following pages of the document, we then see the results that we saw with the map in WebMap. So we've got our 3 planning applications that were found from our area of search. So we can see our first application. We can then see the record for our second. And then we've also got the record for our third application as well. And then at the end of the document, this page can be used for any purpose, really. You can define what you use this for. And in this example, I've decided to include a disclaimer for using the search and for using the planning application data. So that concludes my first use case for enabling members of the public or organisations to use Find It as a self-serve tool for obtaining historic planning application information. Let's return back to WebMap and let's go on to our second use case. So in this example, I'm an officer in the planning department who has just received a planning application I need to process. And as well as recording the application in our planning software, I need to use the map to capture the planning application polygon against our GIS layer and then run a preliminary constraints check. So in Web Map, I'm going to navigate to the application site. And the site is at a football pavilion in York. So we'll search for that address. And from the list of results, I know that address is on Ferry Lane. So again, click on the result and the map will take me to that location. So in the editing tools in Web Map, I now want to capture my application boundary. So we want to add this to my planning applications layer. I'm going to create it as a polygon, and I'm also going to enable snapping. So that allows me to snap to, in my example, my underlying OS master map layer to capture the polygon accurately. So on the map, let's start to capture that boundary. And you might see the cursor just pull into the master map layer. So that is allowing us to snap to that master map data so that we can capture this polygon accurately within the web map environment. So I'm just going to go around this feature and capture the application. And you can see it's quite a complex geometry. Oh, just made a mistake there. Capturing a piece of geometry, but once I've finished, we can then add attribute information to our boundary. So in this instance, I just want to apply the planning reference because this will provide the link between the polygon that I've just captured and the planning application data that is held in another database. And I'll come back to this shortly. But for now, for the reference, let's add the 4th of August, 2020 for today's date as our planning application reference, and then save that feature. So now the feature has been added to our planning application layer, I'm now going to perform my planning constraints using the Find It tool. Now in this example, I'm going to use the select feature. So that allows me to select the polygon on the map that I've just added to the planning application boundary. And we can see that reference here on the left-hand side. And then when I run search, this time the service is going to query a large number of constraints layers in the background and then find everything that intersects my planning application boundary. Now this time we've used different data compared to my previous use case. So first of all, we've got our location data, so we can see which parish, ward and local authority this boundary falls within. We can also see what maybe neighbour consultees are within this particular area. And then underneath, we then got our results of our sort of constraint search. So we can see we're in a conservation area and we've got the name of that conservation area. We can also see this area intersects the flood zone 2 from the Environment Agency. And again, we can include hyperlinks to external resources so we can get more information about that constraint. We can see we're also in a green space area. And we can also see there are 5 tree preservation orders that exist within this planning application boundary. And then finally, we can see we've got a result from our NATS primary surveillance radar data. So perhaps if this was a wind turbine application, we might need to consult NATS about the potential electrical interference this application might have on their radar systems. So just like my previous use case, we want to download the results to PDF because we need to include the results as part of our evidence base for assessing the suitability of the application that has been submitted. And again, if I just show you the report, we can see we now have a different sort of formatted document. So this time it's called our planning constraints report. And again, we've got the same search details on the first page, including the map. And again, as I scroll through the document, we can see the results that I've just shown you with the map. So these are our location details, our neighbour consultees, and again, our constraints that we've just found with our search. And if I just scroll quickly to the last page in the document, I have a different example for this document compared to my previous example. So here I've just used this as an acknowledgement page, this time showing all the copyright statements for the data that has been used in this search. So that concludes my second use case where we included Web Map as part of the planning application registration process by capturing the planning application polygon with the editing tools and then used Find It to search for constraints that intersect it. Let's return back to Web Map. But before I move on to my third use case, let's open a new map. So this map could be available to your internal colleagues or exposed on your website for members of the public to view. And if I go to my map features, I've published my planning applications layer and it is turned on by default. And it will currently show all registered applications. And if I just zoom into the map where I've just added that application boundary for the football pavilion, you'll remember that when we captured the boundary, that the only attribute I applied to the layer was the planning application reference. Now, SIS technology supports connectivity to over 300 data formats, including databases. And so in the background of my GIS layer in this map, I've got a table join that is joining to my planning database. So if I interrogate the application boundary on the map, not only do we see the planning reference that I added to the feature when I captured the polygon, we're also using that as a reference. We're using that reference as a link to the planning database, so I can bring together information in the map for the end user. So the additional information here is pulling the address of the application, details about when the application was received and validated. We can see the proposal. And again, we can also support hyperlinks. So again, we can link out to maybe the online application, so we can see that in more detail and maybe allow members of the public to make comments on that application. So I'm now going to close this map and we'll move on to my third use case. So for my next example, I'm now a member of the planning policy team and we're preparing the housing and economic land availability assessment. And this assessment determines the suitability of land that is available for housing development. And this is a required part of the evidence base in the preparation of the local plan. Now, the site could be owned by a local authority or it may have been proposed by a private landowner. But either way, we should probably do a preliminary assessment to check its potential suitability for housing development. So I know the location of this site, so I'm just going to use my mouse to zoom into that site location. And then within the Find It service, I'm going to use the option to draw a freehand area, to draw my area of search on the map. Now we do have the option underneath here to enable snapping if you want to, so similar to the tools that I showed you within the editing capability. But for this example, I'm just going to draw my site area as a freehand area. And once I've completed my site, we can then run the search from the Find It service. So the results are in again, but this time, rather than going through the results with the map, let's go straight to the download PDF option, and I will show you the results that is found in that document. So again, we have a different formatted document, and again, it's labeled as our site assessment for local plan, and we're already familiar with the first page with the search results and the map. But if we go down to the results, again, we're using different data for this type of search. So here I've got land ownership data from the land registry. So we can see what titles we have here, and we can also see who owns the land. So we've got two results here. So we can see on our first result, we've got a private company that has some land holdings that intersect my area of search. And then for the second result, we can see we've got a local authority. They also own some land in this vicinity. And then following off from this data, we then have local plan policies that might affect this site, which includes the references to the relevant policy in the plan. So here I've got results for ancient woodland. You can also see we've got some listed buildings within this area of search. And again, we've got that policy reference, and there's also hyperlinks to the Historic England website where we can see more information about that listed building. We can see this area also intersects a local nature reserve, and it also intersects a national park and garden as well. So in this use case, we can see that there are many sort of local plan policies that intersect my area of search, and most of which are associated to national designations. So on reflection, this site is likely to be not appropriate for development. So Find It here has enabled me to sort of assess that site really quickly, and I can then move on to the next suggested site for evaluation. So let's return back to WebMap and go to my final use case for today. So my final use case is looking at environmental impact assessments, and the aim of the assessment is to protect the environment. And the local planning authority will need to take this into account, or take into account the likely effects a development could have on the environment before granting planning permission. Now, the applicant will be responsible for hiring experts to complete the assessment. However, maybe at the pre-planning stage, or maybe even after the application has been submitted, the local authority will maybe have to sort of screen the application to determine if the project falls within the remit of the regulations, and an environmental impact assessment might be required. Or they might need to provide sort of a scoping opinion, where the applicant may ask the planning authority for its opinion on what information and issues need to be included in the assessment. So for this example, I'm going to use the same location as my use case, but in the Find It service, I'm simply going to place a point on the map with a 300-meter buffer. And then I want to find all of the environmental constraints that the applicant will need to consider for their environmental impact assessment. So the results are in. Let's view them again in the PDF report. So we can see this is our environmental impact assessment report. And if we scroll down to the results, initially we can see the status of the land according to the agricultural land classification. So we can see this is primarily non-agricultural land. From the British Geological Society, we've got information about the bedrock. So we can see we're in a category called white chalk. We can see information about the soil, and again, we're in the sort of the chalk classification. And we then have some information around potential ground movement hazards that might exist on the site. So from this list, we can see there is actually significant risk of dissolution at this particular area. And this is where, or dissolution is where there might be a presence of soluble material in the ground. And when this gets wet, it dissolves. And this could create cavities in the ground, which could potentially reduce its capability to support any structures above ground. And just like my previous example, we've got information about national designation. So we can see, and we're aware of the presence of a local nature reserve, ancient woodland, national parks and gardens. And then finally, in this example, the site is also 100 meters away from an A road. So this could be susceptible to increased congestion during and after construction, and increasing maybe noise and air pollution in the area. And other factors could also include sort of the presence of important habitats or protected species. So I've now come to the end of my demonstration, and I hope you found that very useful. Just to summarize, I showed you 4 use cases for performing location and constraint-based searches quickly and accurately using Find It for Web Map. And these were, first of all, looking at a member of the public performing a search on planning application history, a planning officer performing a constraint search for a new planning application, a planning policy officer performing a site assessment for potential housing land that could be included as an allocation in the local plan. And then finally, I finished off by showing how Find It could be used by a local authority to provide a scoping opinion to an applicant regarding what environmental impacts need to be addressed in their environmental impact assessments. So I'm now going to pass you back over to Ian, who will wrap up and answer any questions.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much for that. So, so today you've seen some really good use cases of how the Find It tool could be used, and other examples could include backup for consultations or plans, strategies, or impact assessments, where the PDF would provide the information for these reports to be based on. So we came up with some more use cases, such as those listed at the bottom, for example, flooding or right-of-way alterations, or looking at transport assessments. But then other use cases that have come through today, so thank you very much to the people that have submitted these. There's been people say that they could help with freedom of information requests. So that's a really good way of looking at it. We've got solicitor enquiries, and then we've had another one that's looking at personal search, using it as a personal search agent as well. So there's lots and lots of different ways of utilizing the same tool across the authority, rather than just saying that it's restricted to planning constraints or land charges constraints. So it's really adaptable in the way that it can be used. So what are we doing here? So we're using geographical information in an accessible format to help to inform decision-making processes across the organization. And we're also making searches self-service with Find It with a Google Map-like interface. So there's a familiar slippy map and search. The constraints can be mapped on screen with the attribute information, which can be good enough for some purposes. You may have dozens of data sets which need to be analysed quickly, consistently, and repeatedly. The results of the search should be in an understandable format, and furthermore should be accessible to distribute to others. So as you've seen Simon produce, customizable PDF reports are ideal for this, and like I say, you've seen Simon do that. Whilst the public may need open access to a certain amount of data, internal users need to be able to help themselves in a controlled manner as well. So they need access to appropriate data sets via their login. After all, some of the information could be sensitive, and indeed some may not be appropriate to publish to members of the public on an external website. Your corporate database systems that support planning and land charges teams could be PostGIS, SQL, or Oracle databases. CADcorp software supports over 300 different data formats, databases, and web services. So the majority of your data will already be ready to use. It just needs simply plugging in. And the data sets feed into a set of maps to provide the basis of different searches which can be set up for each business purpose. So as you've seen, it's not just one tool for one example. As you've seen Simon shown from the 4 examples today, it can be utilized in different ways, providing different data sets to different users in order for them to do the exact same kind of constraint searching that you've seen. So the key takeaways today, before we move on to the questions, is that Find It is an off-the-shelf, multi-purpose tool which allows many users access search information relevant to them in a standard, easy, and accessible way. And users can self-serve and utilize the results to make informed decisions and be sure that the data being used is current without taking up valuable GIS team time, which we were talking about the GIS resources at the start. So what I'll do now is I'll take questions. There's been quite a few questions. We can't answer them all, unfortunately. So we do have a record of the questions that we have. So what I'll do is I'll cherry pick a couple, and then I will. I'm sure that either myself or one of the other business development managers will get back to you regarding questions that have been asked today. So just looking through them. So one of the questions is, could you send a copy of the PDF report? So yeah, I'll ask Simon to provide us with a copy of the PDF, and I'm sure that we could organise this so it can be sent out when the recording of the webinar goes out as well, just so you can see an example of how that works. Can CADcorp host the application under the layers? So CADcorp have various services available, including fully hosted web mapping and database services, and we utilize Microsoft Azure to do that. We're happy to have more of an in-depth conversation about these services with anyone interested in that after today. Just let us know, and we'll get back to the person that's asked that question around the services that we provide, but the answer to that question is yes. And then if I go through a couple more, so there was one, so I hope I pronounce his name right, but Alpesh has asked, does the Find It tool work on point-based addresses or any polygons to see the attributes? So the answer to that is that effectively any data that falls within the constraint search that's been performed will pull back the attributes that it falls within. So as Simon has shown, I'm sure that some of that data was point-related data, such as listed buildings or tree preservation orders. That data can, as long as it falls within the boundary of the constraint search that you've either drawn or you've created a buffer around or you've selected from the master map, it will show up on the map. So the answer to that is yes, that point data can be included as well. I'll maybe pick 2 more. Somebody's saying, so Brian is saying, is it possible to upload larger, more complex geometries? And this ties into another question, actually. Andrew's asked, would you need the edit add-in and Find It to perform the last example, which came through when Simon was creating the data in the web map application? So that kind of ties in with the same question. So web map can be used for So the Web Map Edit add-in can be used to edit the data within Web Map. So the editing the data can come from a PostGIS, Oracle, or SQL database, and that can be edited in Web Map, or you can create simple geometry in Web Map in order to run your constraints, which is really good. More complex geometries are probably better dealt with in the desktop, because at the current time there's more tools that you can use to trace around polygons, or simply select the master map that you've got available to be used, and then the data that is stored in the desktop can then be brought into Web Map. So it can be saved into a database, which then Web Map will look at and bring the geometries that you've created across. So so you can use complex geometries, and the edit add-in was used for the creating of the simple geometry within the Web Map application. There's still questions coming in, so I'll answer one more. So so there's another one from Brian. So this is the last one. There are questions coming in, but I promise we will get back to you around these when we finish this. Brian actually is asking, does the system keep a copy of the search polygon as an audit trail? So what you will see when you get the PDF is that there's a reference number, and that relates to the polygon that was created. So you can see the actual constraint boundary that was drawn or selected via the master map, but there's also a table that is stored for the constraints that fall within it. So you can use that same reference number to find the information that actually fell within that area that was selected or drawn by yourself. So there's two ways of keeping an audit trail of the data that was being drawn and the data that actually fell within that boundary as well. Okay. So I'm gonna close questions off. Like I say, there are quite a few coming through, but one of our business development managers will get back to you at some point today. And then what I want to do is just finish off. So if you do have any further questions, please use my contact details, as you can see them on screen. I'm more than happy to help. And then finally, I just want to say thank you for attending today. We look forward to your presence at future CAD Corp events.